Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of Vol, and in this video we're going to have a look at how we can use Blender to turn our 3D designs into a laser cuttable file. So in the last video we were making this paint station, and I was explaining that I like to do this in Blender because as something that's got 3 dimensions to it, it's not just a flat object, I like to be able to see what I'm doing and how everything is going to layer up really nicely. And I think that's way easier than using a 2D design program. But then we've got to get it from this 3D version to our laser cutter, and is that going to be actually very difficult? And the answer is no, it's really easy, and Blender actually provides loads of tricks that we can do that makes this actually a very nice process. Now there are some tips and tricks to this that I will go through as we cover this, just to highlight any possible mistake that you could get. So let's get going. So what we're going to start by doing is we've got this mirrored across so we could show it as a whole product. Let's get rid of that. We just know we need 2 of these and they're identical. Then I'm going to select these, G and then X, and bring that over here. So I've got a version that's not been deconstructed if I need to do anything with it. And we're just going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to press Alt and D. Notice that was Alt and D and not Shift and D, which we'd normally use to duplicate. And we'll talk about why I've done that towards the end of the video because it's not really relevant at this bit, so do stick around for that. Now we just need to flatten everything out. We could not do that and get our file for each of these individual pieces one at a time, but it's vastly easier to do them all in one go, especially because I'm using X tools to do my laser cutting, specifically the X tool S1. I will show the whole laser cutting process later so you can see literally everything, but there we can always split bits up if we need to. So what I'm going to do is flatten everything out. So let's just G and X that to the side. And then I'm just going to R, Y and 90. So we've got that flat. We're going to do the same with this back bit as well. So let's G and then Y. And then we can come into side view if you want to do it this way. R and then type in 90. And that's going to rotate that there. Then we're going to need to think about positioning. Now, we could try to make this as perfect as possible, but I'm not really going to bother with that. How efficient you are with where everything is placed is entirely up to you. I'm just going to Shift and D that because we need 2 of them, and let's rotate that. So R and then 180, and then I can move that into, let's say, here. And again, we could put that so these are butting up against each other and we're going to have less material wasted, but that's going to be a tiny bit of material. I don't think it's going to be a massive issue. Then we'll space out these bits. The one thing we don't want is anything overlapping like this. So let's just G and then Y that back there. Same here. And I'm just going to leave a small gap between each one. And keep going until they're all done. And then just correct them so that we've still got those gaps here. So that's G and Y that. Now, as I said, while I think this would probably fit on the X tool S1 in one go, I've only got A3 sized MDF. And that's 3mm thick, so each of these cuts is 3mm thick, and I designed each of these, basically boards, to be 3mm thick to allow me to see that. So let's just move that there and there, but I don't think this is going to go in one go, so I'm just leaving a bit of a gap. Now at this point we want to render this, and this is the process we're going to use. We're going to create an SVG, and then we're going to use that SVG in our laser cutting software. And you'll notice I've not bothered trying to put these on the same Z-axis so that everything's on the same level. You don't need to do that. We can get away without that in Blender and it will work perfectly fine, which is really cool. What I am going to need though is an add-on, and this comes with Blender, so we don't have any worries about that. If you're using Blender 4.2, go to Get Extensions and type in Free and select Freestyle SVG Exporter. You'll have an install button there. If you haven't already installed it, obviously I don't because I have installed it, go to Add-on and then type in Free again, and then make sure that box is ticked and you save your preferences. And then we're going to need a camera. So this is a form of rendering, and all rendering needs a camera in Blender. So let's Shift and A and then bring in a camera. That's going to be very small, so let's just S to scale it up so it's more visible. And then we're going to go to where we think this needs to be. So I'm going to go to this view here. I'm going to press Control, Alt and 0, and my camera is going to go automatically to that, and we can see this view, the blue outline being where the camera is. And you might have noticed that straight away there's a problem. On this right hand side we can see that all of these parts are not lined up because our camera is automatically in perspective view. And things that are closer will look larger and things that are further away will look smaller.
These are small, but the ones out there are far away.
Sorry, couldn't resist that. So what we'll do, we've still got our camera selected. You can see that in our collection. If you've unselected for some reason, you can always come back to this. And we'll go into our camera's object data properties and we'll change that type from perspective to orthographic, and then it's going to go very zoomed in, and we're just going to use this to just scale it out. So to about there. If you need to move around, you can just use these shift buttons if you choose to, so that you don't need to constantly move around. You can also, if you press N, come to view and click camera to view, and that allows you to move around and the camera will do it, so it's easier to pan that way. Just remember to turn that off before you start changing the angle on your view. So now that we can zoom out, we've got our camera there and it's pointing at the things that we want to render. Now if you wonder about why we've got this sort of odd look here when I zoom out, it's just because I'm so far zoomed out that you get a little bit of face fighting, so that's not a problem we need to be concerned about. I'm actually just going to come and hide that camera, so let's just click that and H, just so it doesn't get in the way of anything when I'm looking at my objects. And we'll render this. So to do this, what we need to do is turn on Freestyle SVG in our render properties. So just scroll down, click Freestyle SVG, and then Freestyle there, and then we need to come to our output, and we're going to tell it where to save our files. You can just leave it as the temporary folder, but I want it to go somewhere specific, so I'm going to click there, and this is where I've been making the paint station, so I'm going to go to that and click accept, and now it will save my SVG there. Finally, you just go to view layer, let's get rid of all of these bits that aren't relevant, and we have this freestyle line style SVG exporter. That's a mouthful to say quickly, and this is where we're going to be able to control everything about our SVG. So let's have a look at how this is straight off. I'm going to go to render, render image, and you can see we get a representation of what we're going to end with. And you might have noticed there's a lot of dots here. This is the first likely problem that you might have when rendering. And this is because I've been a little lazy at a point when creating this. If I come back to my main folder, what you can see is in my collection, I've actually got these cylinders just here. They're hidden, but they were used to create this file for the holes of where the paints were. And while they may be hidden from my viewport using that eyes sort of icon, they have an icon next to it that shows if they're going to be rendered. And at the moment, that's still left on, because when these were here, I just pressed H to hide them, and that leaves that render on. So we need to turn that off. As soon as you do that, render and render image, and we're all good. Now we could actually use this straight away, but I want to make some changes and show you some of the cool things you can do, but this might be enough for you. But the first thing I want to deal with is I actually like all my cutting lines when I'm doing my laser cutting to be red. Black I generally use for my scoring, and I'll use something like blue or green for any engraving. So this isn't the way I want this to look. So for that we're going to come to our freestyle options. Again, this is in the view layers properties, and then we've got this line. So we have what are called line sets, and we can make multiples of these. I'll come back to that in a bit. But at the moment, if we scroll down, this tells us what it's looking for and what it's exporting as a line. So at the moment, silhouettes, creases, and borders. And if I come to where it says freestyle color, I can change the color. I'm going to go for red. Render and render image, and we've got all of our lines in red. And again, that might be all you need for this. But we're going to go a stage further and say that there's some potential issues with this. If I come back to my original, at the moment I've set this up so that we've got 3 cuts at the bottom and 3 cuts at the top, and they look relatively similar. These ones are a tiny bit smaller. And let's say I was selling this to people, I want to make sure they know what direction is up. So it'd be good to have an arrow on here. The other thing is that these look very similar, and I want to make sure people know which one's the bottom, the lower middle, the upper middle. The top's very obvious because it's a different size, but there are some slight differences here. For example, this one has more of this circle because I didn't need to cut off the front. So we want to make sure people know which one's which so they don't get it mixed up. So we probably also want a 1, 2, and 3 here. So let's come back to these, and we're going to set that up. And what we're going to do is just use planes to create that numbering and that arrow. So let's shift an A, mesh, and bring in a plane. Let's S to scale that up a bit. I'm just going to bring that over to here. Now I do want this relatively centrally aligned. Let's just get that plane and G and Z it up. So I want this to be pretty central in this just because, well, it will look nicer. I'm going to use an add-on for this, which just allows me to press Alt and A and then just say only do that in the X direction. But I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. You could set this up exactly how you want. I just want to focus on the main point of this tutorial, which is how to get this into our laser cutter. Let's move that back, and I'm just going to very quickly make an arrow. So let's just E to extrude that out along the y-axis. I'm going to press M and merge at center to make the point. Go into vertex mode, select that, and press Alt and D to drag that out with it still being connected. And we'll do that on the y-axis, no, x-axis, there. And then I'm going to Alt and X and symmetrize without removing the redundant centers. That's also using an add-on, but you could use mesh and symmetrize there. So just a really quick process to make an arrow, and then to get this onto this, I'm going to Control J to join it together, and then I can go into face mode, select those faces, let's come to the top, and then using Machine Tools, which is a $5 add-on, and it does make this process really quick, I can just hit 2, and now that's been engraved or knifed onto our object, so we've got that there. I'm going to do exactly the same with these objects to make a 1, 2, and a 3. I'll speed that up because it's identical in terms of process, and I don't think you need me showing that again. Okay, so let's get this rendered again. So render, render image, and we don't get anything showing up. So how are we going to make this show up on our file? Well, this is actually very easy to do. If we just go into edge mode and I select the edges that I'm interested in, so let's go here. All I need to do is press Ctrl and E, and then this brings up our edge menu. You can also do it in the top menu here and click Mark Freestyle Edge. It turns it green, and then we can come over here. I'm going to Alt and Q to quickly go to this one, and then we'll follow exactly the same process for these. So all of these are ready to go, and then we can render them. So let's render image, and no, they're still not here, so why aren't they here? Well, this is one of the things we control over here in our view layer properties. And if we come to where it says edge type, you can see that it tells us what we are looking at this point, or what's going to be rendered. So it will render the silhouette, any creases, any borders, and we haven't ticked the edge marks. So if I click edge mark, and then finally render and render image, now we've got that 1, 2, and 3, and we've got our arrow. But at the moment they're showing up in red, which means they're going to be cut. And I don't want them to be cut. I just want them to be lightly scored on the surface so that we can know where they go. I don't want actual holes. So how are we going to change that? Well, what we're going to do is get rid of that edge mark here, and we're going to recognize that this freestyle line set allows us to have multiple line sets. So what I'm going to do is double click on that, and I'm going to call this cut. Then I'm going to press plus to make a new one, and I'm going to call this score. Now, the cut one is as we set it up. It's red, and we're selecting this information to be put into the render as red lines. If I go to score, this at the moment is set up to be black. We could change the color again if we wanted to. If you wanted to use blue or something, I'm going to stick with black. And I don't want the silhouette, the crease, or the border to be in black. I just want the edges to be black that I've marked. So the edge mark, render, render image, and now everything's perfect. And because there's other options like crease, you could do another line set and have creases a different color. So you've got lots of options here, but in reality, you're only going to really want 3 colors: a cut, a score, and an engrave, unless you want to do things like engraving of different depths, which you could do with different colors. We can also edit these colors later on in Xtools, but I just find it easier to set this up to begin with. So this is where it was being saved. Double click on that, and we've got our render. Excellent. Now, there is one final thing that we have to do in Blender. Now, at the moment, with this saved as an SVG file, we have one issue, and that is that SVG files don't have sizes attributed to them, or at least I don't think they do. I mean, the whole point of SVG files is that they're not size dependent, which is the benefit of them, so it'd be odd if they did. But we need to know the size of this, because otherwise, how are we going to know what size to laser cut it? So I'm going to Shift and D for this. Notice Shift and D, not Alt and D like I did earlier. And I'm just going to press Control and J to join these together. I'm also going to come to my M panel, go to Item, and you'll notice that the scale isn't perfect. So I'm going to Control and A and apply the scale. Make sure your scaling is set to 1 for this trick. And this will now tell us the dimensions of these objects all together. And all we need to do is just note down the size of one of these dimensions, either the X or the Y. So I'll remember the Y, 310.511 millimeters, and then we can get going into Xtool to start laser cutting. So I will show a bit of Xtools just because I think it's so useful to know exactly what you're doing in a bit of software and why what we just did in Blender was relevant. So we'll start just by loading up some wood into the Xtool S1. This is such a great bit of kit, and I was surprised that it's just not as expensive as you'd sort of expect a laser cutter to be. It falling into the end of what I consider a high-ish end consumer resin or filament printer, and I think you can do more than enough with it to easily make it worth its money. Then it will measure the thickness of the wood for us, so we just click here. And it does that using this cool spike device, which always makes me think of RoboCop, which can only help make me love this machine even more.
This is a restricted area.
And then we come up here and just say that we want to mark the size of our wood so we don't make any mistakes. Obviously this is a rectangular piece, but you can do circular objects or polygons. The fact that it can work out the size of a circle from 3 points is really cool. Start marking, and then we just put the laser in the place on the corner, hit the button, go to the other corner, and it will work out exactly where this is, and we can then just put it on our canvas, ready for adding our items on. End marking, and then we click done, and we've got that in place. Then we just bring in the paint station, and it's going to say, well, it doesn't know the size, and it thinks it's too large. So we're just going to click scale to fit, and we don't really care about this. What matters is we're going to come up here to our height, and we know that height was 310 millimeters, 0.511. Hit enter, and then now everything's at the correct size. And we can see that we've got everything in red and black as we wanted. And as I expected, this won't fit just on this. As I said, if I did get this probably right and positioned correctly, we could probably fit this on in one big go if we had a larger piece of wood, but I don't. So what we're going to do is just add a new canvas, and then come back here, and then I'll select here, let's ungroup this, and then we'll just select those bits, Control and X, and then we'll put that on this canvas so that we can laser cut those later. And I'm just going to right click and then group those. Back to here, let's group these again, and then I just want to rotate this round. You're going to see this is definitely not going to take up all the space. Get that in position, and it's just that easy. And as I said, we can split things up if we want to. You can also use your keyboard if you actually just want to move things a little bit. Actually, just so we've got an easier time with this, I'm going to right click here, ungroup that, and then select just these bits here. There we go. Right click and group that, and then select these and group them again. And then I'm just going to move this piece back to where it was, because I'm pretty sure that's going to fit there. And that means I've got less wastage, or at least a good section that I can leave for a future project. Now, if you remember, we set up this so we've got some red lines and some black lines, and we can start modifying what we want to be what. Down here, we've got the red parameter, and then we've got the black parameter, so we can tell it to do different things. For example, I know the red is going to be my cutting, so let's set that to cut. I want the power to be 60, and the speed to be 5 millimeters a second. Whereas the black, I want that to only be a score, and we'll do that at 20% power, and we'll do that at 7 millimeters a second. So now we've got that both set up. And we can also tell it what order to do things in. For example, it's going to do the scoring first and then the cutting, and it's automatically worked that out. Or if we had something that's even the same color, but it's cutting holes inside an object, the Xtool software is very reliable at just working out that you want to do the holes inside first. And if you don't want to do it first, you can change the ordering by coming to the layering system here. So here you can see it's going to do black before red. We could swap that over, and you've got your group list from your different groups, and you can rotate those around to tell it what you want to do and in what order. So it's really easy to use. Click go to process, and it's going to tell us how long this is going to take, and it's going to take 13 minutes and 40 seconds. I mean, that with the other part, which is going to be simpler, I reckon we're going to be done in 25 minutes of laser cutting. Plus the time to make this and set it up, I reckon this is going to have taken less than an hour total, which I'd say is really fast to go from nothing to a paint station. I'm going to click start, and then we just confirm it on the machine once it's ready to go. Now I wanted to show the laser cutting process because, well, it's a laser, like that's awesome, and it's a laser you can reasonably own and have in your home, which is just fantastic. But I have sped this up because we don't want to watch this for 13 odd minutes, and I'll cut the other part off as well. I'll do that off camera, but it's exactly the same process. And then we can have a look at this thing when it's put together. And here's our paint station. As we expected, everything fits perfectly together because we made this in Blender and we know everything's to the exact right size. So a great way to store my paints. But maybe we could be a little bit more compact. The final thing I just wanted to do was come back to the reason why when we were duplicating this, we use the Alt and D button instead of the Shift and D. Now what that does is that creates a link between the two objects. so that if you impact one, it'll impact the other. Now, why this is nice is because, well, we've got this one as a model in 3D that we can look at and decide what we want to do. Let's just delete these so they're not in the way. So we can see everything here laid out, whereas on this side, we've got it ready to go. So what we don't want to do is make changes here and then have to reorient everything. But with this, you don't have to. Say, for example, I've decided that these shelves are a little bit too high. I don't need quite this much space. What I could do is select those two objects there and then go into vertex mode, X-ray mode, and let's say select these, and then G and then Z minus 10. So now they're 10 millimeters shorter. Do the same thing here. G, Z, 10, and then minus. Same thing here, G, Z, and 10 minus. And then finally, same thing here, G, Z, 10 minus. And now we've got everything done, and it's changed both of these. But importantly, it has also changed the sizes of these two objects over here. Just to demonstrate this, if I, in the background, select the vertices here, and select those vertices, and you pay attention to the one in the foreground, if I just G and Y, you can see changing one changes the other, which gives this a really quick way of being able to modify these parts. And then obviously we just need to reorient these slightly to make them fit better, but it's such a quicker way of working. And again, another real benefit of doing this in Blender. So I've printed out that one as well. As you can see, it's a little less tall. I quite like how compact it is, so I haven't really decided which one I prefer. But bear in mind how quickly it was to make those changes. I'm pretty positive I'm going to be staying with Blender for my laser cutting designs. Hopefully you found that video interesting. Let me know what you think. Is this something that could interest you, or was it just interesting to see the whole process? There is a link to the Xtools device in the description if you want to check that out. And it is an affiliate link, so anything you do decide to purchase, if it is something that tempts you, will help to support the channel a bit. Have a great day, guys.